Hey guys, and welcome back to Scarlet Sprites. I've gotten a few questions about my Sega Blast City, so I thought today would be a good opportunity to take some time, go ahead and go through it, and show you guys what's inside. The Blast City cabinets were released in 1996, and while prominent in Japan, we really only ever saw them as Sega bass fishing cabinets here in the United States. Physically, you'll notice that unlike the Astro Cities by Sega, the Blast supports a large lit marquee area. On mine, I've swapped out the default blue card with an original Virtua Fighter 4 Final Tune marquee. I also found a Street Fighter 03 upper marquee that I can swap in for a change of scenery every now and then. Another great feature of the Blast is the 29-inch tri-sync monitor. This will sync up with 15, 24, or 31 kHz signals, making it a nicely sized and well-rounded monitor for many different arcade boards. I will note that my particular monitor, while great overall, does have some geometry and convergence issues. These annoyances seem to be pretty prevalent amongst many owners, despite the nice images that these monitors are capable of. I've spent quite a few hours trying to improve mine with the use of convergence strips, which are essentially just small magnets that are attached to strips that can be stuck onto the back of the monitor. It's a tedious trial and error exercise, and it's also not the safest thing to be doing, given that you need to have the machine turned on while you're back there fooling around with the tube. I'd say I did an okay job on this. The picture is a substantial improvement over where it was when I first got the machine, but it's certainly not perfect. I've considered recapping the chassis, and I even have a kit to do so, but I just haven't gotten around to it. As for the control panel, it has the traditional green and pink sticks and buttons found on candy cabs. Everything is Sanwa brand except for the first player buttons, which I swapped out for Seimitsu buttons. I prefer the Seimitsu buttons at this point, but I'm not planning on replacing the two-player buttons or the ones on my Astro City just yet. The other thing to note is that the sticks are in a square gate, which is pretty common for candy cabinets. So if I push the stick around its limits, it's going to go in a square-shaped pattern. That's a pretty different feel versus an octagonal gate, and it's taken some getting used to on my part, particularly on fighting games. Moving down the cabinet, there is the coin mechanism door, which isn't terribly exciting, and then just below that is the coin bucket, which stores miscellaneous parts and screws for me. So now the bigger question is, what is actually inside this cabinet that is driving the games? There's quite a lot going on here because I'm running a Naomi 2 Netboot setup. Like many systems before, the Naomi features a main board and then a ROM board. The ROM board is normally the actual game that plugs in, and in my case, I'm using a NetDim for the ROM board, which allows me to then send ROMs over a crossover cable directly to the Naomi for loading into its memory. This gives me access to a huge library of games and even allows for me to load Atomiswave games into the Naomi since the two systems are so similar. Before we get to the fun stuff though, a few other things to run down. Original Naomi games came with a security chip, but for net booting purposes, a crafty zero-key chip exists that gets plugged into the setup right here. The NetDim itself needs to be at least firmware version 4.01. Mine is 4.02, which I believe is the latest version released. I'd also highly recommend using the Naomi Multi-BIOS with this. Unlike the Unibios for the Neo Geo, the Naomi Multi-BIOS is free, provided that you can burn it to a chip yourself. The Multi-BIOS does exactly what it sounds like. It gives you the ability to easily switch between regions with the flip of a few switches on the board. This is nice because some of the games are actually region locked and will not play if the incorrect region is set on the BIOS. A good example is Street Fighter 03 Upper. It will only play if you have the Japanese BIOS enabled. And next up is the device that actually sends the games to the Naomi, and it's a very simple Pi Zero with an LCD hat. I have the Pi wired to the power supply. This way, when I turn the power on to the cabinet, it boots up along with everything else. Selecting games is really simple. There are buttons that allow you to scroll through what's on your SD card. you simply stop on the game that you want to play and click another button to then send that game to the Naomi. Load times vary on the game, but on average, nothing takes more than a few minutes to get up and running. One downside is that the game isn't retained in memory after a power down, so you have to load a game basically each time you turn on the Blast City. You can, however, often switch games while playing another by simply selecting another title on the Pi. There are some games that this doesn't work with. For instance, a lot of the Atomiswave games won't reset the system and allow for another game to be loaded. In such cases, you simply just power everything down, turn it back on, and start fresh. With this setup, I have no real need for the Naomi gd-rom. In fact, I sold mine off. The Netboot setup is essentially an EverDrive for the Naomi and Atomiswave, and it allows you to experience the arcade games running on original hardware, not emulation. I believe there are still a handful of games that may not work with this. Virtua Golf comes to mind maybe, but I certainly haven't found anything glaring that is missing. The big hitters on both the Naomi and Atomiswave sides are all represented and fully functional. And that is it for today, everyone. If you have any questions about the Blast City or the Naomi 2, please leave them in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're at too many games this weekend and you happen to see me walking the floor, stop and say hi. Otherwise, I'll catch you all next time. Later, guys.